I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission Citizen Advisory Committee, City of Lowell, for our regular meeting of Monday, August 12th, 2019. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sue, roll call.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Here.
Commissioner Chambers.
Here.
Commissioner Ellis.
Here.
Commissioner Padula.
Here.
Commissioner Plank.
Here.
Commissioner Robin. Here. And Chair Barker.
Here. Thank you. Do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda.
I can second.
and discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. The agenda is approved. Do I have approval or motion for the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, July 8th, our regular meeting?
I'll motion for that.
I'll support.
And discussion? I feel compelled on page 3, just above B, CBD oil, the name Denise Bark should actually be Denise, D-E-N-I-C-E, last name B-A-R-K-E-R. Consider that a typo. Having said that, any other discussion of the minutes? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. The minutes are accepted. Are there any public comments concerning items not on the agenda? Anything on the agenda, we will obviously have public time. Okay, with that, we will go to the old business, which is the Riverview Flats PUD review. I would like Andy to, we've already had opening statements by the applicants, and I think we'll skip that and just go right straight to Andy, and if we have any questions at that point, or if they have any questions, we'll certainly be involved, so, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to, just for a little bit of background, I guess. At the previous meeting, as you recall, we held our, no, we did not hold a public hearing. We held the Planning Commission held its preliminary review of the Riverview Flats PUD plan. Procedurally, how this will work is that after the Planning Commission comes to some determination one way or the other on the proposed PUD, it makes a recommendation to either approve or not approve to the City Council. The City Council must hold a public hearing on this, so there has been no public hearing, there's been no notice to neighbors or anything like that at this point. That'll happen prior to the City Council meeting, and then once the City Council, they will, after the public hearing, make a decision. That rezones the property if it's approved to PUD, and memorializes all of the site plan conditions and statements and everything that's shown on there, parking, landscaping, buildings, etc. Following that, then the applicant comes back for a site plan review by staff. So this is the Planning Commission's, for all intents and purposes, this is your only look at this PUD. And so it's important, if there are questions or concerns, that we get those out. I know some were discussed at the last meeting, and we will go through those.
Andy, we will not do any site plans for phase 2 or 3, or 1 for that matter. This is it for all 3?
Site plan review, I believe, would come back for the, well, I guess I don't know. This might, so typically, yeah, I think this would be your only shot. So unless things change. If they build exactly what they are going to build as shown on the site plan right now, the subsequent phases, the final plans for those would come in for a staff review. That's the way the ordinance is written. I think staff would have the option to refer something to the Planning Commission, or if obviously if there's any change in conditions, if there's changes, significant changes in the number of units and the layout and the parking arrangement and the landscaping, circulation, anything like that, we as staff could refer that to the Planning Commission for a full site plan review. But as the ordinance is written, for PUDs after the planning commission and city council make their determination. It is staff review for the planning commission, or for the final site plan review at the end of the process.
Commissioners, any comments on that at all? Everybody okay with that?
So, that being said, after the previous meeting, you had asked me to check into a handful of items, which we did. There were a few fairly modest adjustments to the site plan, primarily just dealing with parking or not parking, driveways to the parking lot in front of phase 2, and some sidewalk connections. The applicant pretty quickly turned those items around and made those adjustments to the site plan. So that item had been taken care of. You asked me to verify whether or not this was in the city's historic district. It is not. You can see there's a map that I provided in our memorandum dated August 6th that shows the boundaries of the historic district, and this property is a couple of blocks north of that, so it's not in the historic district. You asked for some engineering comments. There were a few provided by Dave Austin of our office. I'll just kind of read what he wrote here. I'm not an engineer, for the record, but he said that the project will connect to an existing 6-inch line on King Street and an existing 4-inch line on Monroe Street. This is for water. The 4-inch line is programmed for replacement with an 8-inch line in the future, along with other street improvements on Monroe. This hasn't been scheduled, but the developer should coordinate with the city before finalizing plans to connect to the 4-inch line in order to plan ahead for transition to the new line. For sanitary sewer, there's...
Andy, is that a matter of condition that we would put on?
Yeah, we have some language in the proposed resolution that would address that, but that's not, it's basically something that working together to make sure that that connection is something that can easily be replaced, and so you're not tearing up the road multiple times, you're doing a lot more work than you would need to do otherwise. Sanitary sewer, basic gravity connection to the 12-inch line in Monroe, no sewer work planned for that area, everything looked okay to him there. The last comment that he provided with regard to storm sewer, there's a note on the site plan that says, as the site is riparian and within a floodplain, stormwater management goals of the project focus on providing stormwater quality improvements, maintaining on-site grading characteristics to provide storage for impending flood conditions. Since the site has direct discharge to the Flat River, this is Dave's language here, we concur with the stated intent, but do not see anything on the plans that shows specific stormwater quality best management practices. They should be presented for review by the city. City typically uses the Kent County Drain Commission standard for stormwater management. So basically what he's saying here is that the site plan states that we're going to, do best management practices, but there's nothing on the drawing that actually suggests that or indicates that other than that statement. So his suggestion there was to ask the applicant to kind of demonstrate what they're going to do to further those sort of stormwater best management practices on the property.
And again, would that be a condition?
Yes. Parking was talked about at the last meeting, which we'll get into here in a second, and then draft a written recommendation. You would ask me to provide a resolution of approval, or which would recommend approval to City Council, which I provided, and we'll go through that here now as well. So I'm going to jump on to parking unless there are questions from the Commission at this time.
Andy, in regard to phase 2 and phase 3, since there's not detailed information provided, can we request as a condition that go through a site plan process now?
I suppose you could, yeah.
Because there's very limited information on either one of those.
Right. Typically, these are conceptual plans, and then again when they come back for site plan reviews, when there's greater detail shown.
Right.
And as long as the layout shown on the final site plan is consistent with this preliminary site plan, there's not any issues. But when they start moving buildings around, or if they have to rearrange a bunch of things, then that would trigger it coming back to the planning commission anyway.
We're also looking at a historic look and all those kinds of
yeah,
things.
but if
So
you're
there are issues there.
yes, so if you want to ask for planning commission site plan review for each of the phases, I suppose you can do that, and you can add that to the condition.
Commissioners, do you understand what I'm asking for here? It just seems to me as though that there is two phases that are limited in scope that we're looking at anyway. And it seems to me as though this part of it is historic and the other part is supposedly going to fit in with the historic look. Not to mention just general things that would seem to me to be apparent to do that. We'll take a vote on it, obviously, but we'll put it on Andy's list here so that we've got it as part of our look through when we go through conditions. If you guys don't mind.
So let's talk about parking. The project overall, they are proposing to provide 49 parking spaces on the property. There would be a total of 44 units throughout all three phases. So phase 1 would have 14, phase 2 they're estimating 16 units, and phase 3 they're estimating 14 units again. So that adds up to 44 units. Under the terms of the zoning ordinance, that would require 88 parking spaces. Your zoning ordinance, along with almost all other zoning ordinances in the state of Michigan, requires 2 spaces for each dwelling. That's extremely common. So they've provided 49 on-street spaces. They've also added in another 18 spaces on 219 High Street, which is the one that's basically right on the other side. It's not really used as parking now, but there is room for 18 parking spaces that would be perpendicular to High Street, facing the library, just kind of lined up right along this street there. That would bring the total up to 67. That still leaves them short of the required total by terms of the zoning ordinance by like 21 spaces or so. The zoning ordinance allows any development within the C2 downtown or within the mixed-use zoning districts to count public parking within 400 feet, either on-street or off-street. You can count all public parking spaces within 400 feet of the property or your required minimum. And so there are about 100 and some odd spaces within that 400 feet. Primarily those are located at the library, and then the lot here right behind City Hall. The lot here right behind Main Street is not within that 400-foot requirement, so those would not be counted. But obviously there's, when we're looking at a shortage of 21 spaces, they make up for that with the public parking. A couple other things that I wanted to talk about is kind of what your standard is and what research has shown the reality to be for these kinds of developments. So we provided a report for you, or a memo, I guess. On page 3 of that memo, we look at using the 4th edition of the Institute of Traffic Engineers Parking Generation. They have a manual, and so there's all of these studies. They do the same thing for traffic generation. But essentially what they do is they perform a lot of studies in various kinds of environments, with various types of developments, whether it's a restaurant or a single-family dwelling or an apartment building or an office or a library or anything else you can think of. And they study what the actual demand is for parking spaces. So how many spaces does this actually require? So your 2 units per dwelling comes from the research that indicates a single-family detached house requires about 1.83 spaces per dwelling. And so typically, again, it's rounded up to 2, and it's pretty easy to administer that kind of a provision. Most driveways and most single-family homes have room for 2 cars, so it's an easy standard for everyone to comply with. When you get into urban areas, things get a little bit more challenging. Obviously, lots tend to be smaller, land is at a premium, and so sometimes it can be difficult to provide the required on-street parking, especially if you have a larger development like a multifamily project such as this one that has a large amount of dwellings and a relatively small amount of land. So in this case, there are a bunch of other categories of land use that are shown in the study here. So we have low/mid-rise apartments in both suburban and urban locations, or we have something called a residential condominium/townhouse in either suburban or urban environments. And so you'll see, looking at this table 1 in our report on page 3, that generally speaking, the data has shown that the parking demand is a bit lower for your low to mid-rise apartments or for your residential condominiums or townhouses. For the low to mid-rise apartments in an urban setting, you're looking at about 1.2 spaces per dwelling. There wasn't a lot of data for the residential condominium, but one of them in a suburban setting was about 1.38. On a Saturday in an urban setting, it was less than 1 space per dwelling. So you can see, and this is common throughout all land uses, so almost anything in an urban environment requires less parking than the same land use but put in a suburban setting. That's not surprising, of course, because if you consider any of the businesses in downtown Lowell, and when we all come down here to visit or go out to eat or something, you park your car in one spot. You might walk to 3 or 4 destinations, but each one doesn't require as much parking, and the same thing is true for housing. We find that people are often more apt to walk to a lot of destinations because there's a lot of destinations that are close, the infrastructure is in place, like sidewalks and walking areas and parks and things like that, where it's not necessary to drive to each and every one of those destinations throughout the course of your day. This is further supported on page 4, table 2, where we look at where we apply that standard provided in that manual to 44 dwelling units, which is the number proposed by the applicant over all 3 phases. So again, that would require about 54 spaces for the low to mid-rise apartment in a suburban setting, about 52 or 53 spaces for the low to mid-rise apartment in an urban setting, about 60 for a residential condominium or townhome in a suburban setting. And we only have Saturday data available for the urban setting for a residential condominium or townhouse, but that total peak parking is 37.2 on a weekend. So looking at this information here, it's, we don't know exactly what the parking demand is going to be because we don't, that's going to depend literally on who buys each unit, right? Some people might have 2 cars, some people might have 1, some people might not have any. We don't know, nobody knows who's going to buy all of these units. But this is kind of demonstrating that the data shows that it is possible, if not likely, that the demand for parking on this site would be less than the 2 units per dwelling that is required by your zoning ordinance. So they have provided 49 on site. If the 18 across High Street were included, that gets them up to 67, which to me gets them pretty close to that range of where the data shows where the demand will likely be, somewhere in that 50 to 60 to maybe 70 spaces range. So there are a few different things that the Planning Commission do here. One thing that the Planning Commission do is just accept it the way it is. If this information increases your comfort level with the amount of parking provided, you could accept the site plan as it's proposed with the parking that's proposed presently. If the parking that is on 238 High Street, so adjacent to the library, those 18 spaces would be included, or if you would want those to be included with that and be required to use those as parking for this development, that's fine. We would add a condition in the resolution that would approve it, that would require the applicant to record a deed restriction or something that would tie that parcel and those parking spaces and require them to be used only for parking for the Riverview Flats project, so that one property couldn't be sold without the other, right? That's a concern sometimes when you have non-contiguous parcels that are working together, is that someone might sell parcel A that is necessary for parcel B to function properly. So that can be solved through a deed restriction or some other similar instrument that would be recorded and run with the property. Additionally, if there are more spaces that you feel would be warranted or necessary on the site, I think it's possible to work with the applicant or for the city and applicants work together to find some additional spaces. So, for example, there might be some ways where the applicant could fit more parking on the property itself. Although you must realize that if that's the case, you're going to be sacrificing green space and walkability and some of those other things that kind of make the project work. Overall, which is on the ordinance. There may be spots on the street available on what would be the north side of High Street. It's kind of informally used as parking now. There could be a way to use some of that space as parking. There's kind of a small, funny little lot on the far northern end of the library, right adjacent to the applicant's property at 238 High Street. It's a very small, what looks to be a not very frequently used parking lot. That's up here. It's a parking lot that's owned by the library, and so the applicant again could look at working out some kind of an agreement with them. Whether or not that would work, I don't know. It's an option to be explored.
Andy, I believe that little lot, the city owns that.
Okay.
We own the property and the library,
Right.
so.
Yeah, and like I said, it's an option. The other things here are, again, I mentioned there may be ways for them to provide additional parking on site. The main area would be they have a small lot on phase 2 between the old school and Monroe Street. It might be possible to widen that lot out, make it angled parking with a one-way drive cutting through the site. You might be able to get some more spots in there, but I'm not sure if that's going to work. They could look at that or anything else. But again, realizing that any green space or anything like that that you would eliminate would go to parking. So I would encourage you to consider that kind of trade-off as you look at that. And then I guess the fourth item, and the applicant would be able to speak to this better than I could probably, would be that it could be a situation where the market kind of dictates how that's going to work out, because I'm not sure if people are going to want to purchase the unit and then walk 300 feet to their vehicle every time they want to go someplace that's not pretty close by.
That's for their second car.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when there's things like visitor parking, I mean, we have public parking lots for visitors. So, some of those things, I guess, don't concern me as much as a planner, because if someone's going to visit anybody who lives downtown on the upper floors of one of these buildings, there's not a dedicated spot for a visitor necessarily. You just go, hey, park on the street, park in one of the public lots, and it seems to work out okay. So I guess with that, that's kind of my thoughts on parking. I'm not really providing you with a direction here as far as what I think you should do. I'm I guess merely providing you the information and the research that shows, the data says what it says, and leaving it to the commission to decide if you feel that what they've proposed here is acceptable.
I got a question about, what about the boat ramp and parking for boats, trailers? Nothing?
I mean, so right now the right-of-way is the right-of-way, and I mean, they have not provided any boat parking. There is a little.
Well, it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, there
Pay
is.
for that.
Right. There is a very small public parking easement pretty close to the ramp, but you're not going to fit many boats in there.
Yeah, once you put one car there, you can't turn around. You got to back in from the road all the way. We already had another boat hit.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the unusual nature of the site, is that, it's been used a certain way for a long time, but a lot of that is
So we should
occurring.
just close the boat ramp and move it?
Well, no, I wouldn't suggest that. I mean, we can't do that. The boat ramp is there to stay. The High Street right-of-way is there to stay. That's not going anywhere. The DNR grant that was acquired to, pay for part of the improvements along the river included a condition that the High Street right-of-way stays as it is. So that's not, you can't close it off or any other.
It just makes it impossible to use, pretty much.
It makes it difficult, yes.
As long as they don't mind their cars getting hit by people back in cars, trailers, it's okay. Everybody's got insurance.
Oh. I guess I can't comment on that.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Well, this parking thing, there's 3 phases, and holistically, when it's all said and done, that's the 49.
49 would be on the site, so on that block.
That's when
Yes.
all 3 phases are done.
Yep.
The third phase, right now they're planning it as green space, is that correct? I think from the last meeting. They're gonna make it a green space until they get to that. If they ever get to it, I think. But my idea is that, okay, we wanted to see them again, see the site plans again. Could we make something, a statement saying, okay, before you start phase 3, we need to revisit parking. And then deal with it, because up until phase 3, they should be okay with parking. I know so I don't know if we're really.
Provided they put all 49 spaces in phase 1, or at very least by the end of phase 2.
14 units are going in phase 1, right?
Correct.
Maybe make it so that every phase, they have to add this many spaces. So they could start phase 1 and complete phase 1 with 14.
Well, most of phase 1 has the parking garages in it, so it's
Yeah.
close to 26, I think,
Yeah.
for phase 1. So they're basically there for phase 1. Phase 2 is where they are woefully short. Yeah. I mean, they need 28 or 32, and they've got 10. So they're woefully short there. The other thing that strikes me, just looking at the sheer numbers of it, 49, at the conclusion of phase 1 or possibly 2. I mean, I guess that could be thought out a little bit better, but I'm thinking if all of the on-site parking is there, you're pretty well covered for phase 1 and 2, particularly if you pick up those 18 spots on High Street on, 219, I guess it is, lot 219? 238, that's right, yeah. So, at that point, you'd have 49 and 18, it'd be 67. You'd have enough for the entire project.
And the other thing that occurs to me, that frankly, these are dwellings, they're not businesses. I mean, that ordinance, we require 2 spaces for everybody in the whole city of Lowell. Except for, we recognize if you're downtown and businesses primarily, but again, businesses, you're not there overnight. So there's a huge difference there between dwelling and having a permanent parking space in a public lot. I mean, if they want to rent it, that's a different story, I guess, but to me, it's setting a very bad precedent. And there is an answer for it right here. I mean, it's fairly evident, I think. And I think, if they had 67 dedicated spots, the 49 that they've already spoken for on site, plus those 18 and 67, I could live with that easily. I mean, it seems to me with the research we have here, that kind of makes some sense. But to allow them to just simply say, we're going to do 49 and we should have 88, it doesn't feel right to me at all. That's my opinion.
I don't want them crowding out the library too.
Exactly. And frankly, if I'm them, their tenants, I wouldn't want to walk 300 feet to go get my car. And what happens if all the spaces were taken? Where would they park? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. So, and it seems to me as though they would recognize that at some point.
Well, I look at it as the building owner in this town. Like, when I put my apartments upstairs, I'm gonna be taking public parking spaces away. Every building owner in this town on this main street does that. We have no parking, period, because we simply don't have enough. To hold somebody and say, well, this 400-foot rule works for everybody, but to me, it just doesn't seem fair. I mean, if it's fair for the entire main street.
But again, you're looking at people that are, for the most part, it's not dwellings, it's businesses. And I understand that, and those people are not there all night long. So you're looking at 44 or 34, 40, 39. You're looking at 39 spots that conceivably could be permanent parking on public lots.
Well, we probably have that already with all the buildings downtown.
Oh, you might.
Probably already have it.
Yeah.
So,
You might.
And it just keeps getting,
more and more, we got
Yeah.
a big
Yeah.
public parking lot.
Yeah.
But
Well,
the population density though for this is
Exactly,
different
is
than
whole different than
an
that.
apartment above your business.
That's correct.
They're a little
Kind of
tough.
dotted around and
Yeah.
whatnot.
It's still the same thing. I mean, he gets free, they should get some spots too.
Well, I'm not saying that they shouldn't get any, but when you're talking
Right.
44
They
units
shouldn't
in
rely on
a
all.
block versus 10 units
I'm all for the
in a block.
18 spots along by the library, that should get them really close.
As far as I'm concerned, if you had the 49 on site and the 18, you got 67, I would highly be very satisfied with that. And that still
And
leaves
with
them,
minimal to go
well, that's still
public.
21 public spots, and that's fine.
Mhm.
That seems reasonable to me.
Yeah,
I have a question about
Yeah.
those 18.
Yeah.
They're right along High Street, so can people park, if you've got someone parked in there perpendicular, couldn't someone, because that's High Street right away, park behind them and block them in? I mean, is parking allowed on High Street right now, because that is a public street?
I don't know the
I
answer.
suppose they probably could park there.
Yeah. I don't think there's any no parking sign.
The,
Once you put it reverse and hit them a couple times, they'll move.
And I guess kind of with that, there's no sidewalk or curb or anything marking that that is a public street. And I know when King Milling was doing their South Broadway, it was a big thing as far as we need sidewalk to get down to the recreation park. I see this as very similar because you're gonna need foot traffic and public traffic to be able to get to the boat launch, and where are they going to go?
And again, I think that the answer would be for the applicant and the city to work together to answer Dave's question, to answer your question, to answer the tenant's questions in a reasonable manner for everybody. And somehow that conversation has to take place. Our job is to make a recommendation to the city council. And that would be part of the condition that we could make, is that we would say, look, the city council and the applicant have to work together on that High Street issue to resolve, like I said, Dave's issue, the sidewalk issue, the parking issue, even the gas lines and electric lines and all the other stuff. Somehow, that conversation has to happen to make Lowell a better city. And I'm not privy to what's gone on in the past or anything along that line. I'm just making that recommendation that that conversation should happen in a civilized manner and be able to accomplish it for the good of the city of Lowell. That's the way I see it.
Is that a conversation with the city or with us as a planning commission?
I think it's with the city myself. That's my take. All we can do is make a recommendation. That's all we're doing anyway, is making a recommendation here on a PUD, and part of that recommendation could certainly be to have that conversation with the city.
I also question, could someone park a boat, a trailer with a boat on it?
Absolutely, we can right now.
And yeah, I mean, anybody can,
Yeah.
but
And that's where you have to work with signage, and you have to do a lot of stuff, yes. I mean, that's absolutely true. But it would be in the best interest of all to have that conversation happen. Even if you're looking at how you access Phase 2, how you access the building, all of those kinds of things could be affected by how High Street is treated. Theoretically, you could put parking on the north side of High Street or whatever side that is. I mean, theoretically, you could do that. There's blue etchings there or whatever's there now, but that's not the answer. I mean, it seems to me as though the whole issue has to be looked at, including the corner that the city owns by the library. I mean, that can certainly be part of that conversation. I mean, it shouldn't be.
that would just be the applicants coming and
Absolutely. I mean,
Asking the
and, you don't want to confiscate or do anything along that line to the applicant's property there, but if that property can be used to enhance the Riverview Flats property and the city, then I think it's up to the city to do everything we can to encourage that. That's my take on it. I mean, it's a great project, and, why are we worried about, things that we shouldn't be worried, we shouldn't have to worry about, I guess is what I'm saying.
Could we make a recommendation to move on phase 1, but phase 2 and 3 be held at consideration of all these different dilemmas?
We can't. What we have to do here is we have to make a recommendation to the city council to adopt a zoning change to a PUD. That's all we're doing. However, when we do that, we are also at the same time doing a site review for phase one. What I'm recommending is we put in a condition in there that we do a further site review for phase two and phase three.
I think that's,
Because there's very limited knowledge here that we have.
Right.
I mean, I don't feel comfortable just saying, oh, okay, go ahead. You know, leave it to Andy, let him do it. Well, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm abdicating my responsibility as a planning commission.
I agree.
I mean,
I see no problem with phase one, but phase two and three are riddled with questions and.
Right. Right. And by doing that, if we simply state that all 49 parking sites have to be built, they're gonna build most of them for phase one. And they're gonna do that as they put in the road. They have to. So that's taken care of. But for phase two, they're woefully short on parking sites, and that's where I would have the recommendation that we do or include those 18 parking sites on there. And with that, put it right to the city and city council and, whoever else, and the applicant to work together to develop that whole area down there and not stop this screwing around and just do it. And do it the right way instead of.
It's a good project, I like it.
It's wonderful. It's great. And it'll be great for the city. Absolutely it will be. I don't have a problem with the project at all. That to me is what I would do, but that's just a recommendation.
Well, maybe Todd or Jerry, could you answer this? Don't you own the property that those 18 spots that we're talking about are on currently, correct?
Yes. Todd, you want to come on up? Or Jerry? Or both.
Do I need to do the for the record with me?
No, I think we've got it right, Sue. Are we okay?
Okay, you got it. Yeah, we own the property with those 18 spots.
Right.
And we also own the property to the west of that where the city has 9 spaces in an easement.
Right by
So
the-
that's all of our property.
Right by a boat launch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the spaces, Bruce, I just want to make sure that, they do own that property. That is their 18 spaces. I want to make sure everybody understands that those 18 count towards phase one, phase two.
Right.
And that boat launch
Yeah.
space is there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, there would have to be some signage there that indicates that it's, for the use of their tenants. I mean, that's what it's there for. Not,
Not post-launch people.
well, exactly. And that's why I say, on the other hand, we have to work together to figure out the boat launch problem or the issue, and where can we get additional parking down there if needed? Do we need, pavement, or can we use grass, or, whatever? I mean, there are other things that we could do if it can be worked out. And it just makes sense for your tenants.
The boat launch, as we've said all along, is a huge part of what we're doing. And I mean, it adds value to the property to limit it or get rid of it. I mean, we couldn't do it if we wanted to, as Andy said. But why would we want to? It's not logical that we want to do that.
Exactly.
Oh, the people are gonna love being on there, I like that,
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Have their own kayaks and everything else.
Yeah, we're putting in kayak racks, some that'll be for our tenants, the flip side of it will be for the public. So that's all part of that whole square.
Of that open green space area, right? Right behind the.
Yeah, that is north property, southwest corner.
Yep.
An old tree stump out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd, you want to address it too?
I'm trying to figure out where to start, so
Feel free.
forgive me if I try to compile a little bit.
We're just trying to get to the bottom of this and do the best we can.
Yeah, thank you. Comment Andy made, maybe the applicant can speak to what we think the real world requirements are. And On July 10, I sent Andy an email which said, as after the last planning commission meeting, that parking was a discussion, and that I went through our prospect list, who I've got good notes on, and they were all either young professionals or empty nesters. I said, so based on that math, it looks like we've got sufficient parking on site. Today, I don't know if you opened it, I think you did, you saw it. I sent Andy an update. I said follow up to the July 10 email I sent. We get the same math, but I got more support. I've had a lot more inquiries since the last planning commission meeting, same profile. Empty nesters and young professionals. And I said again, I think we're going to have more than sufficient parking on site. In reviewing Andy's memo, which was extremely detailed, did a great job. On page 4, table 2, does the math again. His firm is the same engineering firm that we did, our same book and same study, done projects for 35 years, and two biggest issues developments have or buildings have is poor HVAC or parking issues. So it wouldn't make sense for us to develop a project that we knew would have a parking issue. So you develop what you think your real world requirements are, you look at the ordinance to see how those line up, and we also reference ITE book as well. And we said, all right, it's consistent. Our real world math says 49 should be more than sufficient for on-site ITE. If you look at it, we're less than what ITE says it should be. So your engineer's study says that we should have more than sufficient parking on site. So then we step out into, all right, do we meet the ordinance requirements? I think last meeting, Jerry's question, Andy, was fairly direct. Do we meet the requirements of ordinance? And Andy's answer was yes. I guess I'd put the same question to you. Do we meet the requirements?
Nothing has changed, so yes.
Correct. So we meet the requirements. So then I go to Marty's statement, which I think was genuine and honest. Why shouldn't we be able to meet the requirements like everybody else and have a project move forward, right? I think the math was missed. Marty was referring to, all right, these buildings here on Main Street, there's encouragement to convert more dwellings up there into residential units, and Marty was right. He says, the math is going to be the same on me. I've got no on-site parking for my residential units, nor does anybody else. They're all using parking around, public parking, this, that, and other thing. It is blatantly unfair to hold us to a higher standard than you would everybody else. And it's blatantly unfair that if we meet all the requirements, that you come up with some reason why the recommendation would be other than moving ahead with approval. So the reality in my mind is that we meet all the requirements. The on-site math that we've done says we've got more than sufficient parking. The math that Andy's engineer has done says we've got sufficient on-site parking. But then the ordinance allows us to have additional parking within 400 feet of the project. So we've got all that as a buffer. We won't need it as a buffer, but we got all that as a buffer. And we got parking spaces very nearby. So you asked me what my thoughts were. That I guess I probably gave you more than what you wanted, but there you go.
What have we asked?
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, Andy?
No, not at this time.
Commissioners, first of all, is there any other public comment? Let's go there. Please come on out and give us your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Justin St. John. My address is 305 High Street. So if this affects anybody, it affects me a lot because I've been looking at it since I've lived here for 3 years. I'm happy that the grass is getting mowed. From a standpoint of, from what I've gathered here tonight, it seems like the biggest issue is parking, number one, but number two is the boat ramp. You guys already own the property, like you said, the library parking space, whatever. Seems to me like that needs to be redeveloped to help the boat ramp situation. This what they're trying to put in right now is the greatest thing that this town's probably seen. When I moved here 3 years ago, was Lowell the next place to be, correct? Since then, I've seen restaurants, pubs, a factory expand. I've seen new restaurants, and I've seen a housing development that's trying to go through that's getting no traction. Can't have a growing place without people. Parking's gonna be an issue. That's a city issue. That's not this gentleman's issue. So, that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'd like to close it off for the public at this point. And Commissioners, any comments, any thoughts? One more.
Yeah, this isn't my comment. I think this was emailed maybe to Sue or maybe to Andy today from Greg Gilmore. This is a letter supporting our project. Am I allowed to read this, or should I submit it? I'm not sure what to do with it.
You can submit it. I would say it's in support of the project.
Yes.
And Greg Gilmore owns the Flat River.
Yes, and a bunch of other
Okay.
restaurants.
Right,
And he's
right.
basically saying we wholeheartedly support this and urge you to approve it and allow it to proceed as expeditiously as possible. Do we email that to?
You can email it to Sue or physically give it to her and she
Okay.
can scan it in. Either way, whatever's easier.
Yeah, this is real easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, Commissioners, any thoughts?
I don't think, it took on a contentious feel here all of a sudden at the end, but I don't think anyone's against the project. I think everybody likes the project. Everyone wants to see it.
Parking's always been a problem around town.
Yeah, everyone wants to see it happen. No one wants to see a whole school building sitting there.
Yeah, there's running out of windows for kids to break.
Yeah. So,
Okay, anybody else?
Can you review what we're supposed to be recommending?
What our options are?
Summarize what we,
If you want to review it?
So I provided you last week, updated this morning, a resolution that would recommend approval of the project to the city council. It's long, it's 16 pages, I'm not going to read the whole thing right now, so don't worry about that. As I mentioned before, procedurally, this is a recommendation. The city council is the body that has to actually adopt the zoning change after they hold a public hearing. So what we would be looking for, if you're comfortable with the application, would be to adopt this resolution either as it's written or with some modifications. If you are to modify it, we would modify the conditions, and that's what we'll go through here momentarily. So this is basically just a long written decision that justifies why you're making the decision that you're making. It's broken out into a few different parts. So there's a little bit of a preamble on page 1, and then it gets into findings. Starting on the very bottom of page 1, it talks about it satisfying the standards in section 15.02A of the zoning ordinance pertaining to objectives for all PUDs. On page 6, there's a subsection B about halfway down. This begins a new section of the resolution that walks through all of the findings and standards for approval for section 15.02B. Those are qualifying conditions, so in order to apply for a PUD, you have to meet certain conditions. And then starting on page 8, about